But we begin tonight with breaking news. In just the last hour, Donald Trump announced he is nominating former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi to be the nation's next Attorney General. This comes after former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz today abruptly withdrew his name from consideration after just 8 days. Writing in a post on X Twitter, quote, "While the momentum was strong, it is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition," unquote. That distraction was the fact that he had been under investigation by the House Ethics Committee for about 3 years over allegations of sexual misconduct involving a 17-year-old girl and illicit drug use, all of which he has repeatedly denied. And up until today, Trump himself had firmly stood by Gaetz, apparently even working the phones in his favor. It remains unclear what exactly prompted his withdrawal. It could very well have been motivated by the fact that Gaetz simply wasn't going to get enough support in the Senate. NBC News reports that at least 5 Republicans said they were a hard no on his confirmation. There was also the possible release of that potentially damning ethics report, not to mention a continuous stream of damaging revelations against him. The latest being reported just hours ago when NBC News learned that the House Ethics Committee was told that a 17-year-old girl had 2 sexual encounters with the then congressman at a party in 2017. CNN was the first to report on these new allegations, and they say Gaetz's withdrawal announcement came less than an hour after they reached out to his team for comment. Whatever the reasoning may be, this is an abrupt end to the frightening prospect of Gaetz leading the Department of Justice and having access to identifying information about the witnesses who testified against him. And although many Democrats, DOJ officials, and even some Republicans are likely breathing a sigh of relief at the news, remember, he's not the only Trump nominee with these sorts of issues. Joining me now is Melissa Murray, NYU law professor and MSNBC legal analyst, and David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida and an MSNBC political analyst. He's no longer associated with the Republican Party. We love to remind folks, and we still have not discerned the reason why. I do want to start with you, David, because you know these players better than the rest of us. What do you make of Gaetz's rather abrupt withdrawal and his replacement by Pam Bondi?
Yeah, on Gaetz, the votes weren't there. It's not that he was a distraction. The votes weren't there among Republican senators. And I think Susie Wiles, of all people, the president-elect's chief of staff, probably knew that. She was not part of the initial decision. And I think she was part of the decision to now nominate Pam Bondi. I would say, though, this, as we focus on the nominees, the withdrawal of Matt Gaetz is actually a hugely embarrassing moment for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who thought he had a mandate to just nominate whoever he wanted, to push anybody through. This is a failure, probably the first big failure of Donald Trump's last 2 weeks since the election, and it should be seen as such. It's a failure of J.D. Vance, who personally lobbied his Republican colleagues in the Senate, and clearly not enough of them came around. The issues with Matt Gaetz were, first, as Attorney General, he would have pursued the enemies list that Donald Trump wanted him to. Secondly, completely professionally unqualified, no experience that justifies him leading the department. And then third, the serious allegations of sexual misconduct with a minor, which would constitute statutory rape or sex trafficking, as they convicted one of his buddies on in this same underlying case. So moving to Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi started as a relatively Jeb Bush-type Republican. As Attorney General of the state of Florida, pursued the opioid crisis. She was the lead Attorney General challenging Obamacare, trying to overturn it, all the bread and butter Republican issues, but not somebody with a penchant to, say, pursue an enemies list like Matt Gaetz is. It would be interesting to see if she pushes back on Donald Trump with any of that. Joy, she was rumored to be in the running for a nomination in 2017 as part of Donald Trump's first cabinet, but they were not certain she would get confirmed because there was controversy around a donation that Donald Trump made to Pam Bondi's campaign. I believe is determined to be an illegal contribution at the time when Pam Bondi, as Attorney General of Florida, was considering whether or not to bring state charges related to Trump University. So I suspect that will come up as well. The politics have changed, obviously, in 8 years. But I would say Pam Bondi bringing qualifications that Matt Gaetz doesn't. She certainly could be the administrator of the Department of Justice. The politics will play out, and certainly the questions around her past consideration of charges against Donald Trump will certainly play out as well.
And you to describe it, this is the check that was in question, that was written from Donald Trump's charity, Melissa, which is illegal for a charity to donate to a political campaign. It was made clear, according to the Daily Beast reporting, that this was a donation, a $25,000 donation to Pam Bondi's charity, that was made from the Trump Foundation, which has been, essentially delegitimized in the state of New York. It's been taken apart by Tish James because it was conducting activities that were illegal in the state of New York. So we're going to come back to that because this was the issue. She also is a big pusher of the election lies that Donald Trump so much loves to have people push for him. But I don't want to make short shrift. I think that David makes a good point. Before we get back to Pam Bondi, I do want to stay a little bit with Matt Gaetz because here's another graphic. We're going to put up on the screen. This was the spider web tracing the payments, Melissa, that he was allegedly making to women, young women, some of whom would be witnesses in this case regarding the 17-year-old girl. A friend of his, Joel Greenberg, his associate and friend, he pleaded guilty in 2021 to an array of charges, including sex trafficking, and agreed to cooperate against Matt Gaetz. He was later sentenced to 11 years in prison. So someone serving 11 years in prison for involvement in these same parties that allegedly involved this 17-year-old girl. So can we talk just for a moment about what it would have meant to have somebody with that record be the Attorney General of the United States? Those allegations, I should say.
No, well, I will just note this is an all Florida panel talking about an all Florida panel, so that's always nice. But this is truly a kind of Florida man moment, and I think you've already said it. Those kinds of allegations swirling around the nation's top law enforcement officer would, for many, be a bridge too far. And indeed, we saw that for many of those senators, even those who are clearly within the MAGA caucus, it was a bridge too far. So this is not only, I think, a humiliation for Matt Gaetz and a disaster for the president-elect. It is somewhat of a moment of triumph for the Senate. The question for us going forward is whether or not they've expended all of their gas on scuttling this nomination, or whether they have more left in the tank to really stand up to this president-elect as he goes forward pushing these other nominees. Again, the Matt Gaetz nomination was, again, so outside of the box that it makes some of these other nominations look a little bit more orthodox, but a lot of them are truly unorthodox. I mean, one thing that actually kind of unites all of them, and Pam Bondi is no exception, is that they're all really good spokespeople. So Pam Bondi has been a talking head on this network on occasion. She's also been a guest host on Fox. And it seems that at least part of the calculus here is that whatever happens, Donald Trump wants people who are going to be able to talk about what this administrative does, what these various agencies do with clarity and in a way that the public can understand and is accessible to them. And that may be the top priority, maybe even over the kind of experience that we traditionally have prioritized.
Well, that and do his bidding. This is from the Bulwark, David. This is what Matt Gaetz was just saying to Republican senators yesterday. Look, I'm not going to go there and indict Liz Cheney, have stormtroopers bust through the studio door at MSNBC, and arrest Anthony Fauci in my first week, Gaetz told some senators in his one-on-one meetings, according to two people familiar with his remarks. In that last clause, in my first week, that sounded like an ominous disclaimer to some, and it prompted a few senators to ask with a laugh, what happens thereafter? So he was going in promising to be the same Matt Gaetz he's been in the House of Representatives. And apparently, for some senators, they've decided that they would actually like to not live on their knees, taking the knee to Donald Trump in every nomination going forward.
Yeah, that's right. He absolutely would have pursued that because that's what Donald Trump wants his attorney general to do. And Matt Gaetz really, more than anyone over the last 8 years, has shown a willingness to do anything that Donald Trump asks, even when it was very unpopular. And I think it raises a real hard question for the Senate, for Republican senators, and for perhaps Pam Bondi as well. There was a toxic combination with Matt Gaetz, which was not don't know that the enemies list was what disqualified him. It was a lack of experience, and then it was the criminal investigation into sexual misconduct. Now you bring forward a nominee in Pam Bondi who has the executive experience, 8 years as Attorney General of Florida, and she can clearly speak probably to a personal record that speaks to her own personal fitness. So then it isolates this question about the enemies list. Is the enemies list disqualifying? Because what if Pam Bondi says, I'm not going to do that in my first week, but in the first year, we're going to see if the media needs to be investigated, if Liz Cheney needs to be investigated, if Adam Schiff needs to be investigated.